More than a decade after her disappearance, there are still so many questions in the case of Heather Elvis. She was only 20 years old when she was last seen, and allegedly, she was several months pregnant. The apparent father of this baby was her ex-lover, an older, married man whose wife had recently learned of the affair. They've both been charged, those charges have been dropped, and new charges have been brought. Long story short, there's still no one convicted in the death of Heather Elvis, and we still don't really know what happened to her. But there is a new documentary aimed at figuring all of that out. It's called Vanished, the Heather Elvis Case, and it's set to premiere later this month. Ahead of that, we're sitting down with the series director and executive producer Michael Bayer to really take a deep dive into the case. But before we bring in Michael, let's review the facts of the case as we know them right now. This case takes us back to summer of 2013 when Heather Elvis was only 19 years old. She lived near Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and worked at a Tilted Kilt restaurant there. It was through this job at Tilted Kilt that Heather met this man, Sidney Moorer. He was 37 at the time, and the two met in the summer of 2013. He was a repairman who came into the restaurant somewhat regularly to work, and the two just hit it off. Things quickly progressed from them being co-workers who were chatting to a texting relationship and pretty quickly a full-blown affair. That's because Sidney was actually already in a different relationship. He was married. This is his wife, Tammy Moorer. Now, there are some conflicting reports on all of this, or at the very least, some back and forth. Tammy at one point says they were in an open relationship, so they were allowed to see other people. But then, when she finds out that Sidney was seeing Heather, she reacted in a way that doesn't really scream someone in an open, consenting relationship. This is in fall of 2013 when Tammy starts figuring all of this out, and she begins by calling Heather nonstop. She also calls her while she's at work. So much so that Heather is even asked to leave some of her shifts early to stop all the disruption at the restaurant. Tammy also allegedly changes the password to Sidney's cell phone, so she's the only one who can access it, she's the only one who knows it, and she can kind of keep tabs on what he would be doing. This next part is the weirdest, I think. She also apparently handcuffed Sidney to the bed every night for about a month. Now, she eventually says she did this during sex only, but there are other reports that sex wasn't involved at all. She just handcuffed him to the bed every night when he went to sleep, just to make it uncomfortable for him as he's trying to go to sleep, but also so she knows where he is at all times. Heather and Sidney do break off their relationship after a couple of months, but things get even more complicated because Heather may have been pregnant with Sidney's child. This part has not been confirmed, but Heather's coworkers say they saw her putting on some weight before her disappearance, and one coworker even saw her with a pregnancy test. Sidney Moorer was also seen buying a pregnancy test. More on that later. Now, all that background brings us to December 18th, 2013. That's when Heather disappears. That evening into the early morning, Heather was on a first date with someone new. This guy was ruled out almost right away as a suspect, but there is a lot of proof that the two were together before she vanished. This new guy took Heather to a parking lot. He taught her to drive stick. She was excited about it, so she sent a picture to her dad and one of her friends, but he dropped Heather back off at her apartment at 1:15 a.m. About 15 minutes later, a call comes into Heather's phone. It is from a payphone, and the call lasts for about 5 minutes. After this, Heather calls her roommate, and she says Sidney was the one who called her. Now, according to this roommate, Heather said that Sidney told her he was breaking up with his wife. He just wanted to be with Heather. Investigators later went back to trace Heather's phone during all of this time. It went from her apartment to a restaurant called Longbeard's Bar and Grill. The phone then left the restaurant, but it came back and then left once again, headed for Heather's apartment. Now, during the same time frame, Heather's phone called both the payphone and Sidney's cell phone. So around 3:37 a.m., the phone heads to Peachtree Landing, which is a boat launch. It's kind of tucked away in the woods, is about 8 miles from Heather's apartment. All activity on Heather's phone then ends at about 6 o'clock in the morning. On December 19th, Heather's car is found at that boat launch. It was locked, but her keys or purse weren't inside. Investigators later found security camera footage of a truck that's believed to be Sidney's driving to and from that boat landing. There's also security camera video of Sidney buying a pregnancy test like we first talked about. And there's more video too, actually of him on the same payphone that called Heather. At first, he denies this, but when investigators bring up the CCTV, he cracks, he confesses, he says he did speak with Heather that night, but that's all it was just talking. The first arrests in the case weren't even Sydney or Tammy. They were actually two other men, William Christopher Barrett and Garrett Ryan Starnes. These two were charged with obstruction of justice in January of 2014 for misleading the investigation. This is a huge part of Heather's case. It's the court of public opinion. After her disappearance, there was basically a social media storm. People were giving out fake information, pointing the finger at other people who simply weren't involved, specifically Heather's dad. Many people online believed he was part of her disappearance and they wrote about it too. This is a big part of the documentary, and we'll talk about it in our interview too. We'll also talk about the criminal cases of Sydney and Tammy Moore. Now, they were both arrested in April of 2014 and charged with murder, kidnapping, obstruction of justice, and indecent exposure. That last one is a strange charge. Basically, investigators found an explicit picture on their phones during the search for Heather, and it was clearly taken somewhere public. That specific charge was dropped in 2016, and actually so was the murder charge. The trajectory of this case is pretty wild when it comes to the charges. In 2017, Sydney was convicted of obstruction of justice. He went to trial for the kidnapping charge too, but it ended in a hung jury. He was retried 2 years later and he was convicted at that point. Tammy was also convicted in the kidnapping case. That was in October of 2018. Both Moores have maintained their innocence and appealed their convictions, but right now they're both serving a 3-decade prison sentence. Again, that's just for kidnapping. There have been no convictions in the death of Heather Elvis. Now, we've taken you through an overview of the Heather Elvis case, but we can go even deeper. We actually have a special guest today. That's Michael Bayer, the director and producer of Vanished, the Heather Elvis case. It's an upcoming documentary series. Michael, thanks for coming on. And I wanted to ask you right from the start, what brought your interest to the Heather Elvis case?
Well, thanks for having me, Sierra. Basically, one of the biggest reasons why I was attracted to this case was there was a huge element of online harassment involved in it. This story was covered multiple times. It was on Dateline a few times. It was on Investigation Discovery, and a lot of these segments that happened beforehand were they really concentrated a lot on the conflict between Heather and Tammy Moore. A lot of the affair that was going on, the love triangle. There wasn't really much mention or anything really what happened to the Elvis family after Heather disappeared in regards to a lot of it that happened online. This story happened around the end of 2013, beginning of 2014, when social media was kind of really just getting started, and a lot of people, at least the police and the district attorney and a lot of people involved in the case, they weren't really prepared for all the things that were going on online in regards to conspiracy theories, keeping information in. So I really wanted to highlight that. It's something that it's becoming more and more part of criminal cases. So that was the thing that drew me initially to this.
I actually had a chance to watch the episodes ahead of time, and that completely stood out to me as well. Obviously, you laid out the facts of the case, what happened when, all of that, but it's the court of public opinion thing that's just wild. And as you said, this starts back in 2013, so social media kind of in its infancy. And since then, we've seen cases where social media plays a large role. I mean, right now we're even talking about Blake Lively, Justin Baldoni. We saw the Amber Heard, Johnny Depp, but this was kind of new. Can you take me through what was going on? I know there was that word astroturfing that was thrown around. Can you kind of explain it?
Yeah, I think the some of the biggest things I think that people realize the power of social media, like you said, was the court of public opinion. Anytime you have a case, you got to draw from a jury pool in that town. So, what's true and what's not true, people hear it. A lot of people say, "Hey, look, can you be unbiased? Are you able to be, impartial to this case?" And but a lot of this information is coming out online. It's just right in your face on Facebook. In this particular situation, I think what happened here was a lot of these conspiracy theories spread, and the person that was, the suspect in the case at the time was the one that was, starting these rumors, spreading them. And a lot of these other internet trolls and other people, even from out of state, were kind of piling on. And it's a cheap way of getting attention too. So it was very dynamic when you saw it. You look at it and you're like, how did this stuff get out of hand? How did this stuff go? And then just how the Facebook algorithm works is the more people click on something, the more it puts it up at the front. So, kind of this fake news thing that everyone talks about this is kind of how it all started. And people believe what they hear and see constantly.
fake news before fake news was even a term. And there were a couple of obstruction of justice charges in all of this too, because people were putting out facts that were absolutely false and leading the investigation away from the truth, thus wasting money, wasting time. We're trying to find Heather in all of this. So just a crazy situation altogether. You mentioned her family though, and you had some pretty good access on this documentary. I mean, her parents, her sister, her really good friend who was involved. What was it like talking with them about this specific part of it, the social media harassment that they faced?
First off, I did get close to the Elvis family, during this, and yeah, I just want to say that I can't even begin to imagine what they went through. Your daughter goes missing, and then next thing you know, you open up Facebook, and people are starting to point the fingers at you. And I think, speaking to them about it, I mean, they're very, I mean, I can understand their pain and suffering through this. I mean, I'll never really understand it like deep, deep, deep. But I mean, when I spoke to them, you could tell that, you could feel it that, I mean, not only their daughter, but to then be pinned like that. So I think this really gave them an opportunity to tell everyone what went on. And I think that's something that they liked about this documentary. As well, Bree, the roommate, Heather's roommate, a lot of rumors started, and this is a smaller town. So, same deal. I think she was happy to get a lot of this off her chest and kind of tell people what went on.
And I know there had been a gag order that was issued at some point in all of this. So perhaps it was nice for the parents, for the roommate Bree to come forward and say, okay, here's everything. There was actually something interesting that happened, I believe, in the first episode. It was Bree who said that she initially reported that Heather had a bad relationship with her parents, that they kicked her out. And then come to find out that's not true at all. So her words were kind of being taken out of context. What she initially said wasn't actually true. I mean, is that a big part of this case too, the he said she said situation?
That is probably what I think, really gave people a lot of fuel to start this fire. Because when the police first started to investigate this, they asked Bree, what happened? Tell us everything. Hey, Heather told me she was kicked out of her house. This all went on a police recording. Somebody with access to this information then uploads it onto YouTube, and it's all out there for the world to see. And another thing to think about is the police and the DA, in South Carolina, they call the DA the solicitor. So, but the solicitor and the police, they don't want to release this information because they're building up a case. They're doing an investigation. It can harm them by getting this information out there and telling everyone what really is going on. So if someone has access to things, it can only put out what they want other people to see. And then, that's how rumors get started. So yeah, that was one thing Bree didn't know at the time. That's just what Heather told her. And you know what? Those rumors, they go around, and then people start to say, well, there must be something going on here between Terry and his daughter. They didn't get along. Is he involved? And we don't have any of this other information. So, we're hearing this firsthand. What do we believe? So, yeah.
And that's really how a narrative can start if one side is releasing information that is helpful to them and withholding others. I mean, if the public only gets 3 items, they believe those 3 items when there could be 10 useful pieces of evidence. So that is kind of an interesting aspect of the case. I do want to start back at the beginning, though. I want to go back to their 2013. Heather is this young woman. She's only 20 years old. And I wanted to talk about her relationship with Sydney Moore. She was working. She met him there. They were kind of talking at work, then became friends. And the lines between coworker-ish and to friend to lover kind of got blurred. What was their relationship, though? Because it wasn't that long.
It was not that long, and I think this is another thing that really hit the internet was this love affair, and Heather deserved it, and she shouldn't be with a married man. One thing that I noticed, and when I started looking at the story and investigating what people were saying online and everything, just to get an idea of what happened, Heather was 19 years old at the time. He was married in his late 30s. She's a child. I mean, she's young. I mean, I understand the age of consent is 18, but I'm not just the age difference, but also the fact that she's only 19. I don't think she really understood a lot of the situation she was in. And also, Sydney Moore was very manipulative in saying, "Hey, look, my wife doesn't care. This is an open relationship. She's taking her out in public." So, a lot. I don't see too much blame in Heather in regards to that. love affair and what kind of all everyone was saying online, just because of her age and you really just don't understand life at that point, and also how he manipulated her. Also, a big part of the case, or a big part of the motive for why Tammy got so upset, because they did break up. It was a few months long. It wasn't like a long thing. They ended once Tammy found out about it, and then there was a period where she moved on with her life, went away, then he re-engaged. There's a big speculation that she was pregnant. So that is the huge part of the motive of what led to everything following that relationship and her disappearance. Now, also going back to her being 19 and just young and all, not taking so he's a married man with children, and he's not taking any precautions in regards to that. I mean, it's yeah, I mean, it's very frustrating when you start to hear everyone saying, well, you know what, she shouldn't have been doing this, or she shouldn't have been doing that. I think the major majority of the responsibility fell on him, and a lot of people were, if you look at social media, were blaming her, which I didn't see that.
I initially said she was 20 and you corrected me in that she was
She was
19. Would
19 when they met. When they met,
Okay,
so
so
when they
19
met,
when they
so she was 20, right? Exactly.
Okay, okay. I'm glad you brought that up though, because I really think it opens the picture to she's a teenager, 19. She's a kid. I mean, yes, legally, as you said, she can give consent, but I don't think there should be any sort of blaming in this at all. She was in a relationship that she believed was consensual. And I do kind of feel kind of on your side of things that Sydney Moorer had more of the responsibility. You brought up his wife, though, Tammy, and she kind of plays a role in this because of the potential pregnancy that Heather had, that potentially the father could have been Sydney. How does she kind of weave her way into all of this? Because there are some weird allegations that she would repeatedly call Heather's work. Also, she was retaliating at her husband by handcuffing him to a bed. I mean, a lot going on with this woman. What can you tell me about Tammy?
Yeah, the relationship between the two, when we kind of the further you dig into it, he was very dependent, on her. I mean, I don't want to get into, I never spoke to her, or never had an interview with her, so I don't want to start saying things about her. But what I got from their relationships, I mean, was it abusive, or was he in a bad situation too? People can watch this film and documentary and kind of see for themselves. I don't know. I mean, he's there. He's also very responsible for her disappearance. He went along with it. Her personality is a strong, very strong personality. As you can see, she sought Heather and wanted to get revenge. I think a big motive of it was that speculation part that she was pregnant. There's no evidence in it. But yeah, I mean, when you look at their relationship between each other and how she treated him, I think a lot of people can, draw their own conclusions that, maybe it was a bit of a, abusive relationship in that respect.
I think the dynamics in this are really what interests people, not only that social media aspect, but additionally the relationship between Tammy and Sydney. And then, of course, Sydney and Heather, Tammy and Heather. I mean, there's so much going on. The next part of the case, though, eventually becomes that the two Moores are charged with her murder. And then those charges are later dropped. So, right now, there's no one who's been convicted in the murder or in the death of Heather Elvis. I mean, what do you feel about that?
I think that's where this documentary really shines a light on this story, is because it's not closed. It's still an ongoing investigation. We have people in prison for kidnapping, but no one really knows what happens after that truck leaves that landing. We know Heather's car is there. We know the truck went down there. We know she was lured there by Sydney. He admitted to making that phone call from the payphone, but no one knows what transpired after those events. And I think that's where a lot of people want answers. Now, the Moores were convicted by a jury that they were involved in her disappearance, and they were convicted on kidnapping charges. It was 30 years with good behavior. They're going to get out before that, but they will get out of prison. Now, in regards to what can happen next, people want to know, were there more people involved? Were there other people involved? The documentary looks at that. Also, now that the appeals are almost finished, are one side going to flip on the other? Are there going to be any deals? The family. What I got from the Elvis family is they're not vengeful people. They're not like, hey, we're after the Moors and we want, as much punishment as possible. They have their idea of what happened and who's involved. They want their daughter back. I think that's kind of what they want most out of everything to get closure for this case.
It's so sad to think about the fact that we do have the two people who are in prison right now serving time for kidnapping. So we know that they were involved, but we don't have anyone that we can point the finger at and say 100% responsible for Heather's death. I think that's something that's really tricky too. But you pointed out a good point that this case is still open. So are you hoping potentially somebody watching this may trigger a memory, or somebody else may come forward and feel like enough time has passed, I can bring forward this information? We hear about this in cases all the time. Is that something you're hopeful for?
Absolutely. Whatever they say, whenever there's a secret between two people, the other one's always paranoid that the other one's gonna, come out against them. So you have that dynamic going. They're going to be in prison for a long time for this kidnapping charge. There's other people that are in prison as well, along with them. Can they get any information out of them? When I was speaking to the prosecutor in the case, Nancy Livesay, she was saying that they modeled this case on another one that they did in Horry County. And I can't remember the guy's name, but it was the same situation where he was arrested. He was charged and convicted of kidnapping. They were pretty sure he did the murder. There was information that came out while he was in prison. They got him saying something, and then he ended up getting convicted for the murder and even got capital punishment. So that is a possibility. If there's other people involved besides Sydney and Tammy, they can come forward. Maybe they're young at the time. Who knows who else was involved? Anybody watching this documentary, or even listening to this podcast right now, you know, what if they saw something that night, reported in, by bringing attention, maybe at the time you didn't want to because all the media attention was going on and maybe your circumstances changed. Maybe at this point, it might be a good time to bring forward information because, time has passed. So who knows? But yes, I would that would be really beneficial if this documentary can bring out any new information on the case.
And there really have been so many developments from 2013 when she first went missing. It's been over a decade now, which is kind of hard to believe. But there's been back and forth of people being charged, charges being dropped, appeals being made, hung juries. I mean, there's so much going on in this case. So you're right, things could eventually come to light. I know a lot of people are going to want to watch this show and see what it's all about, this docu-series. Where can they find it?
They'll be able to watch it on Apple TV and Amazon Prime Video March 10th.
March 10th. Make sure to mark your calendars. Michael Bayer, thank you so much for coming on and talking with us about this case.
Yep. Thank you for having me.
Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Sierra Gillespie.